With the NFL draft over a month away, the Chicago Bears hold the number 1 draft pick, and while many were skeptical about whether or not they were going to trade it, it's becoming pretty clear that GM Ryan Poles is leaning towards trading the pick. Now, the last time that the number 1 draft pick was traded was in 2016, when the Los Angeles Rams traded up to the number 1 spot in order to acquire Jared Goff. And before that, the number 1 pick was traded just 11 other times. Let's look back at how all of them panned out. Starting with the New Orleans Saints. The first time that the top pick was traded came in the 1967 AFL-NFL Player Entry Draft. The Saints sent the first overall selection to the Baltimore Colts in exchange for quarterback Gary Kuzo. Kuzo appeared in 7 games for the Colts during this 1967 season, making 1 start and threw 4 touchdown passes on the year. With the first overall selection, the Colts drafted defensive lineman Bubba Smith, who would go on to record 52.5 sacks over his NFL career. Quazzo started 10 games for the Saints in 1968 and posted a 3-7 record. He eventually lost his starting job to Billy Kilmer and was traded to the Minnesota Vikings in 1968. A year later, the top pick was traded once again, with the New York Giants trading away the top pick, a 1967 first and second round pick, and a 1969 second round pick in exchange for quarterback Fran Tarkenton. Now wait a minute, why would they trade 2 picks from the previous year's draft? Well, when AFL and NFL merger was being discussed, it led to a debate over what team would be picking first in the 1967 AFL-NFL draft. And while it was assumed the New Orleans Saints, as an expansion team, would have the first overall pick, which as we know they traded to Baltimore, but then the New York Giants threw a wrinkle into those plans. How, you may ask? Well, in the discussion of the merger between the 2 leagues, the Giants actually negotiated for the rights to pick a quarterback with the first selection in either the 1967 or 1968 AFL-NFL draft, regardless of their record. They chose the 1968 AFL-NFL draft and traded around to package that pick for the rights of Fran Tarkenton, and Tarkenton started all 14 games for the Giants in 1967. In return, the Vikings received 2 picks in the 1967 AFL-NFL draft, the first overall pick in 1968 and a second round pick in 1969. In the 1967 draft, they added running back Clint Jones in the first round and wide receiver Bob Grimm in the second. In 1969, they added offensive lineman Ed White in the second round, and with the first overall pick in 1968, they drafted tackle Ron Yeri, who would go on to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Fast forward a few years, in 1974, the Houston Oilers traded away the number 1 pick and a third round pick in exchange for defensive end Tony Smith and receiver Billy Parks. You could say that the Cowboys got the better end of this deal though. Smith recorded 3.5 sacks for the Oilers in 1973 and put together a 10-sack season in 1974. But when you look at how the Cowboys used those picks, you can see why they came away on the better end of things. With the third round pick in 1974, the Cowboys drafted quarterback Danny White, who would start 92 games for Dallas over his NFL career. And with Houston's first overall pick, the Cowboys drafted defensive end Ed Jones, who helped the Cowboys win Super Bowl 12. And just a year later, in 1975, the Baltimore Colts traded away their top pick in exchange for a third round pick and O-lineman George Kunz. This trade, though, changed the landscape of the NFL draft forever. It was the first time a team moved up to draft a quarterback. A week before the draft, the Falcons moved up from the 3rd overall selection to the first spot to draft quarterback Steve Bartkowski out of California. The Colts added to their offensive line, picking guard Ken Huff out of North Carolina 3rd overall. While Bartkowski went on to start 121 games for the Falcons, including leading them to a 12-4 record during the 1980 season and the NFC West title, both teams probably wonder what could have been, because the Chicago Bears drafted arguably the greatest running back in history with the 4th overall pick, Walter Payton. Fast forward 3 years, in 1978, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers traded away their top pick in exchange for tight end Jimmy Gills, a first round pick, a second round pick, a 1979 third round pick, and a 1979 fifth round pick. And for the second time in 4 years, the Oilers were involved in a pick involving the first overall selection, giving up a player and 4 picks for the rights to the top pick in the 1978 draft. However, unlike their previous play into a trade like this move seems to have paid off, as the Oilers drafted running back Earl Campbell. Campbell would play 7 years in Houston, rushing for over 8,500 yards and 73 touchdowns with the Oilers. With the Buccaneers picks, they drafted quarterback Doug Williams in the first round, who led Tampa Bay in the playoffs 3 of the 4 years he was a starter. Guard Brett Moritz, who only played 6 games in the second round, defensive end Reggie Lewis in the third, and then quarterback Chuck Bolsina in the 5th round a year later. Giles also earned multiple Pro Bowl selections during his time with the Buccaneers and was enshrined in the team's Ring of Honor. Now in this next quest for the top pick, two trades were involved. One in June of 1983, with the Buccaneers trading the number 1 pick to the Bengals in return for quarterback Jack Thompson, and in April of 1984, when the Patriots traded 2 first-round picks, a 10th-round pick and a 1985 5th-round pick in exchange for the number 1 selection. The Patriots wanted to make sure they drafted their choice of wide receivers in the 1984 draft, so they sent their own pick at 16, a pick at 28 they received to the Raiders in the draft involving defensive back Mike Haynes, and 2 additional picks to the Bengals so that they can come up to the top of the board and receive the first overall pick. The Patriots drafted wide receiver Irving Fryer out of Nebraska, where he would put up over 12,000 yards and 84 touchdowns, making it just the second time a receiver had been drafted first overall. The Bengals added defensive end Pete Koch at 16 overall, who had just 8 sacks in 58 games. O-lineman Brian Blados at 28 overall, who had a solid career. Running back Brent Ziegler in the 10th round, and defensive back Lee Davis in the 5th round the following season. Fast forward a few years later, the Indianapolis Colts traded away offensive tackle Chris Hinton, receiver Andre Rison, a 5th round pick, and a 1991 1st round pick in order to acquire the 1990 1st pick and 4th round pick from the Falcons. They used that first overall pick on quarterback Jeff George, who threw for 41 touchdowns and 46 interceptions before being traded in 1994. Atlanta drafted tight end Reggie Redding in the 5th round of the 1990 draft. The following year, they added receiver Mike Pritchard using the 1st round pick sent to them by Indianapolis, who caught for over 500 yards and 26 touchdowns in the 9th season. A few years later, Atlanta traded for George when the new VP and Director of Football Operations Bill Tobin took over in Indianapolis. Another trade for the top pick happened the following year in 1991 when the Cowboys traded their 1st and 2nd round pick, cornerback Ron Francis, linebacker David Howard, and linebacker Eugene Lockhart Jr. The 1991 draft had quite a twist before it even got underway, because Rajiv Ismail, the Notre Dame wide receiver and projected 1st overall selection, got an offer to sign a then-record deal with the Toronto Argonauts of the CFL and ditched the NFL. That left the Cowboys scrambling. Dallas had traded up to the 1st overall spot and was negotiating with Ismail's agents, but when the receiver left for the CFL, the Cowboys drafted defensive tackle Russell Maryland. After the draft, Dallas head coach Jim Johnson said that Maryland was a player they wanted all along, as he would go on to win Defensive Rookie of the Year. The Patriots added offensive tackle Pat Harlow in the 1st round, who started 91 games, and defensive back Jerome Henderson in the 2nd round, along with 3 players that they acquired in the trade. In 1995, in what might have been the biggest fleece for the number 1 pick, the Bengals traded just their 1st and 2nd round pick for the number 1 selection. The new expansion team, Carolina Panthers, held the 1st overall selection after picking 2nd in the 1995 NFL expansion draft behind the Jacksonville Jaguars. However, Carolina traded back to the 5th overall spot with the Cincinnati Bengals, who moved to the top of the board to take a running back. Cincinnati drafted Kijana Carter out of Penn State with the 1st overall selection. Despite an amazing career at Penn State, Carter struggled with injuries. He tore a knee ligament in his first preseason game and missed the entirety of his rookie season. In over 4 years in Cincinnati, Carter gained just under 750 rushing yards, scoring 16 touchdowns. But the picks the Panthers received, they drafted Carter's college teammate, quarterback Kerry Collins, 5th overall, who helped the Panthers reach the NFC Championship game in just his 2nd NFL season. Carolina also added defensive end Sean King with 36th pick. In 1997, the St. Louis Rams traded away their 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 7th round pick for the Jets' 1st overall selection. And with the 1st overall pick, they selected offensive tackle Orlando Pace. Pace would become a cornerstone left tackle for the franchise, earning 7 Pro Bowls, 3 first-team All-Pro selections, and a Super Bowl ring. Pace was then inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame as part of their 2016 class. As for the Jets, they received a 6th overall selection in the 1997 draft from St. Louis, which they used to trade back again in a move with the Seattle Seahawks. The Jets ended up drafting linebacker James Farrior with the 8th overall pick. New York also traded the 3rd round pick received in the deal, which was the 67th pick overall, to Denver in exchange for 3 picks in the 1998 draft. Denver selected offensive guard Dan Neal with that pick. The Jets did use the 4th round pick, drafting defensive end Terry Day. New York then traded the 7th round pick to the Eagles in exchange for defensive tackle Ronnie Dixon, and the Eagles drafted quarterback Coy Detmer. In 2001, the Falcons traded receiver Tim Dwight in a first and third round pick and a 2002 second round pick in what might have been the most even trade in history, with Atlanta moved up from the 5th overall pick to the top of the board to draft Michael Vick. In return, the Chargers received wide receiver Tim Dwight and 3 selections. They drafted Tay Cody, a cornerback from Florida State in the 3rd round, and Ray J. Caldwell, a receiver from Florida, in the 2nd round of the 2002 NFL Draft. And with that 5th overall selection in 2001, San Diego drafted running back LaDainian Tomlinson. And now finally, the last time that the top pick had been traded, in 2016 when the Rams traded a 1st, a 3rd round pick, and also a 2017 1st and 3rd round pick, in exchange for the 1st pick, a 4th round pick, and a 6th round pick. The Rams drafted California quarterback Jared Goff, trading away one of the picks they received, and drafted tight end Tamarick Hemingway in the 7th round. As for the Titans, they turned those picks into some impressive talent. They then traded the 15th selection with the Cleveland Browns to come up to 8th overall, where they drafted offensive tackle Jack Conklin. With the 2 picks they received in the 2017 draft, they added wide receiver Corey Davis and tight end Jonnu Smith. They drafted defensive tackle Austin Johnson with one of those 2nd round picks, and with the other, they drafted one of the greatest running backs ever, Derrick Henry. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you would like to see more content like this, be sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned for more uploads.